Story 1. I was born with birth asphyxia. I was delivered via cesarean section. I had a staph infection when I was very little, and there was a time when I literally became psychotic. So it's pretty safe to say that without modern medicine, I would be in the ground. Story 2. I had a pulmonary embolism when I was 19. Also had a pickup truck run me over and break my leg when I was 6. But do pickup trucks exist in this theoretical world? Story 3. Yes. I stayed stuck in the birth canal for 12 hours with no progress before the doctor performed the cesarean section that resulted in a very squished little me with a flat forehead that thankfully evened back out over about a week's time. Story 4. Yes, my body does not produce cortisol at all, like zero, due to a genetic condition. Had I been born 100 years ago, I would not have made it to my first birthday. Story 5. 2 heart attacks. Left anterior descending, also known as the Widowmaker. 2 angioplasties, first through the femoral artery, second through my wrist. Back home 2 days later, $187,000 and $125,000 in medical bills. Story 6. Hemoglobin level of 4.6 for who knows how long. Months I couldn't breathe but didn't know why. Just needed some transfusions and some intravenous iron, and now I am as good as new. 7 days in the hospital though. Story 7. Tetanus, my now former step-grandfather. My mom dumped my now former and, at the time, deadbeat stepfather. That whole side of the family were just horrible people. They probably still are. Was a mechanic at home as a hobby, so there were plenty of rusty car parts in their backyard. Story 8. Most people currently alive would be dead were it not for modern medicine. A simple infected cut can kill you. I have had sinus infections that, left untreated, might have done it. Story 9. I don't know about death, but I would definitely have a terrible quality of life. I'd be exhausted and disoriented all the time due to 5 concussions and be dealing with mental health problems without any medication. Story 10. The answer to this question is yes for many people who don't realize it. Being born in a stable place where people know what to look for if you are in distress is the result of thousands of years of medical knowledge being passed to those helping with your birth. Story 11. Yes, 34-week breech baby. Likely would have died if I hadn't exited through the sunroof. Also spent 11 days in neonatal intensive care unit and couldn't suck, so even if I had been born alive, I would have starved to death. Story 12. Allergy, but to be fair, the allergy was to a medication, so I wouldn't have almost died without modern medicine. It was both the cause and the cure. Story 13. I would have died at around the age of 5 from blood poisoning due to a catastrophic intestinal hernia, most likely. I don't actually remember it, but apparently I'm very resistant to the anesthetic they used to put me under for the surgery. Fun times. Story 14. About 10 times over by now, starting with dying at birth because of the cesarean my mother wouldn't have received. But to be fair, I am pretty sure my dad would have died from polio when he was a kid. He spent many years in hospital because of that, and I never would have been conceived to begin with. Story 15. Maybe not dead but paralyzed possibly, though I got a resilient strain of staphylococcus from a hospital, so 40 to 50 years ago though, my wife would be dead from allergies alone. Story 16. I would be dead from a sinus infection. My uncle, who was born in the 1930s, died at 10 months old from eczema, which is basically a skin infection. It spread, and they could not stop it because he could not get penicillin. Story 17. I survived a pulmonary embolism during my second pregnancy at age 23, and then a ruptured ectopic pregnancy 18 months later. Both required emergency intervention. Story 18. Oh geez, from numerous things. I was a breech baby, so a cesarean section was necessary. I had chronic strep infections as a kid and several bladder infections. I have had bad ulcerative colitis since I was 14. I had appendicitis as an adult. A miscarriage was making me sick before having a dilation and curettage. I have ankylosing spondylitis affecting my spine. I have esophagitis, which is eroding my esophagus. Story 19. I got asthma that would be 10 times worse if my tonsils weren't removed, and I could be wrong, but I feel like autism isn't exactly the best thing to have without modern medical knowledge. Story 20. I would be dead several times over. Chickenpox when I was 7. Any number of childhood illnesses I was vaccinated against. Car accident at 12. A nasty bout of flu in my teens. Nasty ear infection in my 20s. Preeclampsia during pregnancy, and my second pregnancy was a cesarean section. Story 21. I have hydrocephalus, have since birth. Depending on how bad the complications got without a shunt, that could have killed me. If it didn't, the chronic urinary tract infections, secondary to spina bifida, would have by now without antibiotics. They nearly have with them even. Story 22. My mother had a placenta previa and had to have an emergency cesarean section, and then I was rushed to the neonatal intensive care unit. This was over 30 years ago, and it's still amazing we both made it. Story 23. Yes, and maybe my baby too, from postnatal depression and psychosis. Thank God for antipsychotics and antidepressants. Also, the cesarean section we had was for the baby's benefit, so she also owes her life to modern medicine. Story 24. 3 of my 4 children would have died and taken me with them. All healthy pregnancies, I was healthy, no complications until labor. Oh, and pneumonia. I had that 5 times. They are better now, but my lungs used to give me a lot of problems. I blame my mother for smoking while pregnant with me and near me throughout my childhood. Story 25. Hyaline membrane disease. It killed John F. Kennedy's kid 15 years earlier. I had minor enough residual effects to be able to spend 21 years in the army. Guess I turned out all right. Story 26. Heart problems, mostly. Had a triple bypass and then a valve replaced. I told the surgeon I could either feel sorry for myself or be glad I live in a time when your heart can be fixed. Story 27. Due to my extremely aggressive case of diabetes, I am still dying at an accelerated rate, but I would have died a long time ago without the large amount of medications I require to consume daily. Story 28. Probably wouldn't be born in the first place, in vitro fertilization, twins, premature birth. But if I somehow made it through the first year of my life, allergies to many things. Story 29. I had sepsis at 6 weeks old. Allergies throughout my life, and I keep developing new ones, so it's not like I'm going around exposing myself to known allergens. I also get sick very frequently, so I probably would have died of infection at some point if I didn't have antibiotics. Bleeding too heavily or for too long during periods. Suicide, less likely due to depression and more likely due to psychosis, is also a strong contender. One of these. I probably would have died at 6 weeks, though, so I wouldn't have had time to find out about all the other things that could kill me without modern medicine. Story 30. Not me, but my 2 kids, both born prematurely. My oldest was born with a soft skull, while my youngest stayed in an incubator for 2 weeks. Thanks to the advancement of science, particularly medicine, both of them grew up just like normal kids and excel well in school. Story 31. When I was 12, I had bacterial pneumonia that left a hole in my lung. At 13, a dog attacked me. I got 57 staples and stitches and spent 3 weeks in the hospital. In 2017, I had bacterial pneumonia and ended up in the emergency room. In 2023, I had bacterial pneumonia again. I would have died from all of those. Story 32. Probably I had asthma as a kid. It disappeared before I hit high school, but I distinctly remember needing an inhaler back when I was still in elementary school. Story 33. Childbirth for sure. Needed a cesarean section with my first. The baby would be dead too. My husband would have died a year later from a ruptured appendix. Or possibly from tonsillitis as a child. Story 34. I don't know if I would be dead from it, but I would probably be dead as a consequence of it. When I was in 5th or 6th grade, I developed a giant cell granuloma on the front of my lower jaw. By the time it was taken out, it was the size of a large green grape. Probably would have continued to grow until I starved to death. Story 35. Yes. Diamond blackfan anemia. Very rare anemia that affects the bone marrow's ability to create red blood cells. Very disheartening to know that if the apocalypse ever happens, I won't be surviving it very long once my medication is all used up. Story 36. Yes, 40 years ago, my appendix burst. I didn't have any pain or discomfort, so I didn't know it for 4 days. The doctor sent me to the emergency room. They operated on me, and I spent 13 days in the hospital. I almost didn't make it, even with modern medicine. Story 37. Yes, in childbirth, as the baby. And if I would have survived, I would have a clubfoot. Well, I still have one, but I got surgery and lots of therapy and terrible eyesight. Story 38. Type 1 diabetes, an autoimmune disease. I'm pretty sure I would be dead. Even if I avoided carbohydrates and sugars completely, unless I specifically worked out to drop my sugar levels, it would still rise significantly on a daily basis because of random mood swings, illnesses, and my biggest enemy, my liver. Yes, I would be dead. Story 39. Yeah, for sure, when I was 2, I became severely dehydrated and had to be kept in an oxygen tent overnight and be pumped full of fluid to make sure I didn't die. Story 40. I have bad vision. I wouldn't have made it past toddlerhood because I would have been eaten by a saber-toothed tiger in Flintstones days. Really, an infection from a random scrape or cut after walking into something. Story 41. Yeah, when I was 11, I was regularly going to the hospital to get magnetic resonance imaging scans for my epilepsy. While I was at the big children's hospital in my city, I caught a rare influenza that is not common in our country. There were 3 cases in isolation from people who came back from Africa. I was so sick they thought I had meningitis and was at risk of dying in 24 hours. I lost all the excess weight on my body to the point of looking fully anorexic within 3 days. Story 42. I suffer from massive wiener disease. It's fatal 60% of the time. Fortunately, my Dr. Icy Wiener has helped me through the power of modern science to reduce it. Overall, without it, I'd be a goner. Story 43. A cat bit me on my wrist. It really sunk her teeth in. My arm swelled up the next day. If I hadn't gotten antibiotics, I guess I would have had to amputate it, and even then, who knows if I could have survived. Story 44. I've had pneumonia like 3 times, and then my appendix burst in high school. So yes, I'd probably be dead multiple times over. Story 45. I was hit head-on by a work truck while cycling. If not for modern medicine, I would almost certainly be dead or severely injured. I had to have a titanium rod put in my right arm to replace my humerus and my jaw wired shut to straighten my teeth. Story 46. So at what point is it considered modern medicine? Are we going back to World War I type medicine or nothing in the last 30 years? Because the stage of medicine is the deciding factor for my answer. I was born at 2.2 pounds. I'd say I'm probably dead if I'm considered to be born to modern medicine. Story 47. I was born with congenital diaphragmatic hernia, but it wasn't discovered until I was 6 days old. This was in the 1980s before they could detect it or correct it in utero. At nearly a week old, I stopped breathing on my own and turned blue. I was rushed to the emergency room where they found the issue. There was a hole in my diaphragm, and my intestines had protruded up into my chest, wrapping around my lungs and pushing my heart to the side. One of my lungs was completely collapsed, and the other was partially collapsed. I was airlifted to Atlanta to have emergency surgery. The surgeon said that normally babies die from this condition, or they have a low chance of surviving the surgery, but because I had fought so hard for a week and had such a will to live, he gave me a 50% chance of surviving. I died on the table but was revived and survived in the neonatal intensive care unit for a month, with wires hooked to my tiny body. I lived when I should have died because of modern medicine, even if it was the old-school approach. I have a scar that reaches across my belly, proving that I am meant to be here. Story 48. Possibly because I was breech and mom had a cesarean section. Obviously, breech doesn't automatically mean the baby won't live, so it would depend on the skill of the midwife, I suppose. Also, I had strep throat so many times as a kid, I'm sure I would have had scarlet fever. I also had a sunny-side-up baby who had inhaled meconium, so I switched to a cesarean section. I probably would have survived giving birth, but she may not have. Story 49. Yes, I have 3 or 4 books on natural medicine, but I don't live in the right location to cultivate these organisms or have access to the minerals. Though I guess not, because I don't really take medicine for much anyway. Story 50. Possibly from childbirth. On one hand, modern medicine might have contributed to me bleeding all over the floor. On the other hand, modern medicine stopped me from continuing to bleed all over the floor. Who knows? Story 51. Yes, when I was 7, I got Lyme disease and didn't know I had it for several months. It got so bad that I developed a fever of 108 degrees and was projectile vomiting. My father was scared. We lived over an hour away from a hospital, and I was admitted upon arrival. The doctor was upset at my dad for not catching the Lyme disease earlier. I had a bullseye on my collarbone that started out like a mosquito bite, but I never told him about it. Everything was okay in the end. I had several doctor's appointments in the coming months to check if the disease was still attacking my immune system. I was on antibiotics for months too. I'm 29 years old now and still have a weak immune system, but I'm alive. Story 52. I developed sepsis after a prostate biopsy. I spent 2 days in the shock trauma unit with massive amounts of antibiotics. The nurses said the doctor mentioned I had a 50-50 chance. I owe my life to modern medicine. Story 53. Yes, I was born with pyloric stenosis. I had surgery for it when I was a few days old, and without it, I probably wouldn't have survived more than a few weeks. Story 54. I would have been stillborn. The medication that kept my mom's body from rejecting me only became available for doctors to prescribe 4 years before I was born. Story 55. Childbirth. As the mom, hemorrhaged after my son was born and needed emergency surgery and 2 blood transfusions immediately after he was born. I'm so grateful for modern medicine and that I live where I do so I can watch my amazing kid grow up. Story 56. Probably several bleeding ulcers in grade school would probably have done me in. If not, I've had a pretty good run up to 59 years. Gallstones were horrible and could have done me in, but who is to say that a different diet wouldn't have prevented them too?